Part 2, Chapter 14, Linchpin. Lyomik reared proudly above me, her hand covered in my blood, dripping to the cold stone floor. I lay on the floor, eyes agape and mouth slacked. She raised her hand up and looked at the stain with a dirty grin. "Fun," she stated happily. My slanted head pointed to the open doorway. The flickering shadows of torchlight caused the pool of blood to glisten. She waited, staring at nothing with some bizarre sentiment in her eyes. Minutes passed, and still she idled, until finally she let loose a tender sigh and stepped forward. Her shadow cast over my face as she moved around me and started for the door. Her fleshy steps echoed, and the torches began to dim. As she reached the frame, she stopped. A look of concern washed over her as she felt the disturbing energy. Eyes shooting to the floor, she witnessed the smooth slab of concrete crack abruptly. A single pebble floated upwards from the split, hovering right in front of her face and continuing on to the ceiling. More stones rose, each growing larger as more of the floor cracked and the room itself began to shake. Her teeth slowly clasped together with a wide, troubled grin. Turning sharply back into the room, she witnessed me rise from the floor with wilted limbs and a heavy body. A powerful flowing surge of misty brown and purple energy swirled around me, causing gusts of abnormal wind to lash in every direction. The sound of this rushing air was deafening and crippled her ability to think rationally. "That doesn't make any sense," Lyomik gasped angrily. My head was straight, mouth closed tight and eyes beaming at her trembling posture. My eyes were glowing, producing a vibrant, fierce blue light with an outer purple rim, which engulfed not only my irises, but the entirety of my eyeballs. I could see the wind, but could not feel its rage on my skin. I watched Lyomik stand under the doorframe, waiting for my next move and trying to solve this puzzle before her. But aside from that, I could sense something else. The electric smoke that so desperately reached out to me had a voice. I could hear her, and the chains. Chains, not chimes. Instinctively, my right arm raised and I snapped my fingers. The snap calmed the storm around us in an instant, and at the same time sent a response. She glared, becoming angrier by the second. "That's impossible. Your soul was diminished, snuffed. What is this power?" She stepped forward. "It's Tuffle at the core, but infused with you. What are you?" My hand lowered and I looked to my shoulder. My wounds remained, but I felt no lasting pain. Slowly, I came to a realization. The cage held a missing piece, a piece that was stripped away from me so long ago and was damned to embrace the sting of loneliness. Forever out of reach, but constantly surging my body with signs that I harbor something more. My voice was crunching and baited. "Where is Alice?" I spat. Her head cocked to the side, and a demented grin fought for dominance over the confused scowl. "No matter. All this means is that your soul will be that much more filling." With that, she charged at me. The hair on her head grew sharp and stretched down to her right shoulder, engulfing her arm and turning it into a spiked gauntlet that she rapidly threw at my face. She closed the small gap quickly, but I remained still. My body reacted on pure instinct, which allowed her to get this close to me before making my own move, rendering a counterattack impossible. Her fist swung at my head, and I ducked, the needle hair skimming my own and pulling loose a few strands. In the same motion, I rose up into her torso with a fist of my own, punching her in the chest and launching her upwards into the ceiling. Her head and neck crunched into the smooth ceiling, and her body fumbled back down, but she landed on her feet with a stumble, then rested in a crouched position. This time, I was the one rushing in. Swiftly, efficiently, I slid up to her and knocked her in the chin. Then I reached out and grabbed her by the face, where I somehow shot a hot pulse of energy directly from my palm and sent her flying backward toward the door. She slammed to the floor and skid on her back until her head was in the next room. "Damn it!" she snarled before her eyes opened. When they did, her anger was quickly switched to shock as she looked up to see another figure standing above her. I reset myself to a basic stance and stared with curiosity too. With a thought, the flames on every nearby torch, to both my sides, the floor, and the one just outside the door, burned bright all at once. My heated face reverted to a biased glee. "Alice!" I called. Alice looked down at the tuffle who stared back with grit teeth. Then she turned her eyes to me and gave me an enforcing smile. Finally. My glowing eyes simmered to a dim radiance, and my guard was dropped. Lyoma quickly pulled herself to her feet and stood in between us, eyes darting back and forth. Then she composed herself with a deep breath. "This is quite a surprise, I'll admit." I heard her speak, but didn't focus on her words. I was looking past her at Alice, who stood tall with a confident posture. She wore nothing at all, and her hair was disheveled. On her wrists were tightly bound clamps with dangling broken chains that dragged on the ground, at least 5 feet long. With her being so close to me, I noticed a slight burning on my skin and looked to see my wounds healing themselves. Relieved, my own energy began to subside, and my eyes slowly returned to normal. Lyomik shouted, "I'll just have to kill you both!" Alice sneered at her sister. "You may be able to fool humans with your tricks and illusions, but I see right through you." "And just what do you see?" she confidently sneered. "I can see your ascended form, but don't exactly feel intimidated by it." "You should be. The weakest of us all should not haphazardly toss around conjecture," Lyomik said, offended. Alice's voice was irritated and tired. "Why does everyone insinuate I'm weak?" "Because the ditch does not lie. You, underdeveloped, shrill, starving little wretch. You should never have been granted life, and yet you were plucked." Lyomik's hair was growing sharp again, the angrier she got. Alice churned. "The mysteries we live with. I will have my answers one day. But for now, why don't you drop the illusion and show Kim what we both know is there?" She huffed, shoulders getting tense before she finally straightened out and sucked in a charge of breath. "All this talk is pointless." She looked at me, glaring with fierce eyes over her shoulder. "You haven't even seen my true power. When I'm done here, I'm going to find where your corpse fell and kill every last human in the 5-mile radius. Little Kimmy," she threatened with acidic detest. Alice folded her arms, the chains clanged together. Then I felt that same heat start to rise from Alice's skin. Her face scrunched in, and her brows became sharp. "I don't think she appreciates you calling her that name. You don't have the right." "And just how do I earn such a right?" She played along, turning back with twisted glee. "Neither of us can flaunt that name. She chooses. It's a human thing. Respect it." "Listen to yourself. Her body belongs to you." She switched back to serious but kept a small curve to her lips. Alice was smirking arrogantly, looking at me, then back to her. "Up until recently, I've been following that curdle we all share. The ache to kill, consume, reap. Though something feels different. Something inside me. I can't explain it. But I'm curious to see where this thread will lead." "Don't tell me you've grown compassionate. That's heresy, sister." "I wouldn't quite call it that," Alice affirmed. A misty, cracking static sweltered in the doorway around Alice. The walls blurred in my peripheral, and the flames were slapped around. Alice took a step forward, and Lyomik retreated the same step. Then Lyomik snickered and began to step toward her. The atmosphere rose with each second as its rage infected the air. I released the tension in my limbs and stepped off to the side, allowing them to have this battle. I placed myself beside a torch along the sidelines and watched with bated breath as Alice stepped into the room and they sized each other up. "If your anima is defective, then I hope it doesn't have a bitter aftertaste," Lyomic made a quick dash. Lyomic used the momentum from her sprint and punched her square in the face. With a loud wet crack, her head was knocked to the side, but she quickly reset her neck and leered. No effect. Alice pulled her head back slightly and threw her hand in a horizontal motion just short of the Tuffel's face, missing on purpose. The chain followed and wrapped around her neck. Alice grabbed the end of the broken link after it circled her throat a few times and held her in place, lifting her up by pulling the two ends of the chain. Lyomic gagged first, then laughed. She brought her hands down on the chain, imbuing her flesh with demonic energy and cutting through the links. The chains broke and unraveled from her neck as her knees bent. Immediately after the chains broke, she sprang upwards, hitting Alice under the chin with a solid uppercut. She staggered backward and reset her stance, keeping her defenses raised. Alice dug her heel into the ground and lunged forward, sending a hard punch her way. Lyomic spun herself around, using her thick mass of hair to absorb the impact. Alice's fist got lodged in the thorn-like follicles. Many thin strands pierced straight through her hand and fingers. She harshly bent forward, pulling Alice in closer to her back, and then sent a reverse mule kick into her gut, bloodily ripping her hand free and sending her skidding away. She came to a dragging halt on her feet, dust kicked up and sprinkled back down. She stood tall, sweating but her face unchanged. Determined. Lyomic jumped at her with a yell, and while in mid-air, she gripped a section of her own hair and ripped it out. The clump of fiber merged into a solid red, dagger-like object and swiftly lashed at Alice's face. She stepped back, enough to dodge, but as Lyomic landed from her pounce, she immediately lunged and swung horizontally with frantic, animalistic movements. She managed to land consecutive hits on Alice's gut and chest, sending bits of blood and flesh to the floor. I watched from the sidelines, my body twitching and almost reacting to every move they made. The flurry of slashes ceased, and Lyomic stepped back, panting. Alice slightly bent forward, watching her own blood drain from her stomach and chest. Then, Alice started to cackle. "So, this is the extent of your power. I expected more from your ascension," she mocked. Lyomic spit to the floor and gripped the hair blade tightly. Then her face sank as Alice reared her head proudly. It was engulfed in a blinding white glow. The two of us shielded our eyes as the lasting flash spread across the room, accompanied by a low hissing sound. In a moment or two, the light had faded away, revealing the true potential behind her healing ability. All the wounds she had just inflicted were gone. "What?" Lyomic growled, her arms losing strength. Alice recovered her breath, then let her glare flatten. "Care to try again?" Without thinking, she ran forward once more. The blade crumpled to loose fibers, and instead of throwing a punch or kick, Lyomic sprang onto Alice and wrapped her limbs around her. Alice didn't struggle. Lyomic sneered, then contracted her arms and legs, tightening until both of their bodies shook from the pressure, and with a loud grunt, Lyomic revealed another creative attack. The hair on her head retracted down to almost the length of my hair. Then, the hairs bunched up under her skin and collectively shot out from the flesh of her entire body, becoming solid and unbreakable needles. 100 or so of those thorns pierced Alice and sent a burst of blood in every direction. Her eyes shot open, and more blood fell from her lips. She gasped a raspy breath, and then it went quiet again. Lyomic recalled the thousands of needles and hopped off Alice, backing off a few steps. Alice was still standing, but angled back with her face directed above. Her arms hung loosely behind her, and she was entirely riddled with small holes, dripping blood everywhere. As expected, steady white steam began to pour from Alice's wounds. The more steam that came, the more Alice straightened her back and returned to her normal posture. Lyomic gave a high-pitched growl and blitzed again. "Not this time! Now you die!" Alice opened her eyes casually and took a sloppy step forward, meeting Lyomic face to face. Without missing a beat, in a fraction of a second, Alice shot her hand straight up under Lyomic's chin, her fingers pointed upward and claws fully extended. The static sound of energy transferring from one person to another left a soft thump to bounce around us. Then a long hush. Their eyes focused together, noses nearly touched. A slow stream of blood flowed from under her eyeballs, and a raspy breath escaped through her flared teeth. Alice moved so fast, with such immense force, that she drove her claws straight through her skull from under her jaw. Lyomic's face was stuck in shock, and her eyes slowly started to drift down into the side. Strangely, her outward appearance almost flickered before fading into a different form. She was mostly the same, all the details exact, except she had no black markings on her face or arms, and her horns disappeared. Her hair remained the same length, but was tamed, more neatly kempt. Alice lifted her foot up and placed it on her sister's chest to hold herself steady, then pulled her hand inward toward her own face and pushed Lyomic's body with her foot. With the push and pull, her claws violently shredded through the skull and flesh, cleaving out from behind her face. She fell backward, hitting the floor with a wet thump, her entire head now looking like it went through a wood chipper. I watched with sickened amazement, inching forward as Alice gawked at her bloody hand, retracting her claws. "You... holy shit," I said, fixated on the corpse. My body was exhausted. I felt the burn in my bones while stumbling forward to meet her in the center of the room. She looked at me with ghastly neutrality before offering a slight smirk. There was an awkward pause. Alice started fidgeting with the clasps around her wrist. I sighed. "I'm really happy to see you." She squinted at me. "I thought you hated me." My eyes grew heavy. "I did. Maybe I still do. But I don't know. Being separated from you felt like I was cut in half. Now that you're here, I feel complete again." Alice hummed. Another pause. The body occupied my vision, stomach gurgling with nausea. "You know, she seemed really powerful to me, but you handled her like it was no big deal." "Any human, even you, could not hope to stand against Tuffle in hand-to-hand combat. I'm shocked you lasted as long as you did." My words dripped out. "Destro and Lyomic, they both defeated me so effortlessly," I said sorrowfully. "Again with the pity? Don't make me slap you." I raised my head, and we both locked eyes. She continued. "What you did, just before I got here, what was that?" she asked, an edge of worry in her voice. "What do you mean? I thought that was your power going through me." "No, not in here. I am my power. You are your soul. We cannot overlap in that way here. That was Tuffle power, and it came from you." She pressed her lips together, confused and frustrated. "I don't understand. Tuffle power in me? But..." She scoffed. "None of this makes sense. Lyomic getting help from another Tuffle to invade? That creature being summoned to weaken you? My early birth, and now this." "Wait, how do you know about, Minerva?" "That static you kept seeing was me projecting. I woke here, chained to a wall in some dark place I've never been. Thankfully, I spent some time wandering these corridors when you shut down over the past week. Although many halls had shifted and I was forced to send sparks of energy to find you. I saw that beast and, well, I'm pretty bummed I didn't get to fight it." "Trust me, you didn't want to." I grunted, some pain returning. She clenched and unclenched her fist multiple times. I could sense the radiating frustration. Her nose crinkled and she stomped one foot. "Ah! This shouldn't be so complicated," she shouted angrily. We gawked at each other for a moment. Then she simmered with an annoyed exhale. I aggressively rubbed my forehead and then sat down on the floor, allowing my body to rest. I watched carefully as she pried the chains away, discarding them to the side. The way she moved was the antithesis of who I understood her to be. Her shoulders were slumped, eyes low and emotionally flatlined. There was so much going on inside her head, things I don't even want to challenge. "Kim," the seriousness in her voice got my attention. "I'm glad you're okay." That caught me off guard. "Really? You were worried about me?" She turned away, crossing her arms and straightening her back. She was hesitant to respond. "If you died, I would have died." I snickered to myself. Out in the real world, I may not understand when she's being genuine or bratty, but here, judging by how she held herself, it was obvious to me. "Yeah, sorry about that." Lyomic's body then emitted a purple light from beneath her flesh, altering the course of this somber conversation. The refracting glow painted the skin of my face and caused a burning sensation. I quickly stood up and moved away from the body while Alice approached it. The corpse then started to flake away, crumbling into tiny pieces and floating upwards, collecting in a dense pile about 4 feet off the ground. In mere moments, the body was gone, and in its place floated a hand-sized purple stone that gently lowered to the floor. Alice snatched it from the air before it touched the ground and let it rest in her palm. I dragged my feet to her and stood on her left side, the two of us taking in its cold illumination. "What is that?" I asked. "This is our anima, our soul, and, relevantly, our eyes' color, because I knew you were going to ask," she said blandly. The stone itself was clean cut in some places and jagged in others, like it was professionally sliced by one guy and smashed with a hammer by another. It was thin, about 3 inches wide and 5 inches long, with a flat top and bottom. "It's cracked," I stated, noticing a small split in the upper half. "Damaged, maybe," she guessed. "You don't know?" I doubted. She shook her head. "Doesn't matter. This is the true reward. This is why we fight. Lyomic's own power, along with the essence of every human she has killed. All mine." Half excited, mostly tired, I responded, "Awesome. So, what do we do with it?" She held the stone loosely and then closed her fist around it. A bright flash of light burst out between her fingers, and with the flash, Alice jerked forward, gripping her wrist tight as it sank into her skin. The light faded away, and the stone was entirely gone. As she absorbed the stone, I felt a new pressure on my body, one that buckled my knees and almost caused me to lose my balance entirely. A loss of breath worried me, and I fearfully looked over my skin. The color had drained slightly, and my spine felt weakened. "I'm withering with every kill." There was a very, very long silence. Alice stared mindlessly but intensely through the doorway while I paced, thinking. I shivered, feeling disturbed and utterly gross at the entire situation. I started. "It seems like every day just brings a new mystery, huh?" My voice echoed. "I'm interested to find the answers. Only one can provide them, and now we're that much closer." "I know, but the Tuffle are giving us, me, so much trouble. How can we ever hope to beat him?" "We have to try." Her voice was monotone, distracted. I stopped pacing and dug my heel into the ground. "If we face sin and lose, we'll both die. If we face sin and win, then what happens?" She shrugged. "You'll die either way." Hearing her confirm that for me draped another lead veil over my head. My lower lip quivered, and a sorrowful series of breaths escaped me. Tonto and her mom popped into my head. Anxiety crept up my spine, and a weariness coated my skin in dense ink. I separated myself from her, moving to the deeper part of the room. Along the way, I stepped over to where Lyomic's body had rested and kicked something metallic. Reacting to the noise, I bent down and retrieved the half coin she possessed. My knees cracked and my muscles ached, but I stood again at a slant and held it out for Alice to see. "She said she used this to get in. Maybe we can use it to get me out?" Her brows lowered, confused. Then she walked over to me with a moderate haste. "Let me see it." Watching her move, physically, in front of me was still jarring. I couldn't help but stare. Taking it from my hand, she observed the bronze closely. She rotated it twice. The purple of her irises grew brighter, then dimmed. A curl of her upper lip showed dissatisfaction. "I don't know anything about this item, but It's clearly made of some type of magic, or imbued with a powerful spell. I tried to joke. Do we have to recite, like, an incantation or something? She snickered. I suspect it's temporary bonding magic. Given that it's half of a coin, I'd say you were probably given the other half, and that's what established a bridge between you two. You're right. I think that's what she said earlier. I blinked a few times, repeating her words in my head. I was getting fuzzy now, tired. But I don't have any other coin. You must. She dropped it back into my hand. I checked all my pockets when I got here, I said, whining. Check again, Alice demanded. Rustling my hair in the back, I fixed some loose strands and then patted myself down. Everything was just as expected, until I got to my back right pocket. I froze and shot her a surprised glance. Sure enough, another half of the coin was there. Removing it with haste, I held the 2 coins out in front of me and saw that they were indeed a match. I don't understand. I'm sure it wasn't there before, I griped. Laomic probably cast an illusion on you. You must have found it, and she made you forget. She twisted her wrist, cracking it. That's what I would have done. Well, here goes nothing. I slowly joined the 2 halves in the middle and watched intently as the spark merged the pieces into one solid mass with a satisfying clang. The moment they joined together, I felt my brain swell and shrink rapidly. The space around me changed in an instant. An expanse of open air surrounded me, and an all-revealing ray poured down from above. Blinding white swallowed every inch of my body, and I started to rise without a word or sound. Excruciating pain consumed me in a fiery white whirlwind of memories and voices. Spinning through a lit tunnel, I braced myself and witnessed the pinhole light above grow wider and wider. I reached the top and took a massive gulp of air as my body sat up. My overly sensitive ears were assaulted by a harsh slamming of rain all around me. My vision was still white, but slowly reset itself and I was able to look around to see where I was. The park. I'm back. The rain soaked through to my very core, and I shivered intensely. The park was empty now, and the daylight was fading. A few scattered street lamps by the parking lot and soccer field lit patches of the land and messed with my eyesight as the streaks of water passed through and around the downward beams. You're awake. A quiet female voice whispered from behind me, just barely audible behind the crashing water. I suppose that means you found it. My brain responded with hostile aggression, but my body was unable to follow such a drastic command. I felt my spine grind as I slowly rolled to the side and planted my hands in the dirt, crouching and facing the voice. It was the tuffle in the cloak that attacked me. Their cloak was dark, heavy from the rain, but they stood in a relaxed manner, looking down at me. You, I growled. The storm bombarded my ears and made it hard to think. The comforting burn of Alice's static erupted in my head. I'm here, she announced to me. I nodded, then started to bring myself to my feet. Just who the hell are you? My nose crinkled. The stranger lingered a moment, arms loose by their side. Then, to my surprise, they turned and started to walk away from me. One of my feet twitched, and I took a half step forward. Hey, wait! Where do you think you're going? A sudden rough cough stole my lungs and forced my eyes to close as I controlled the wheeze. In 4 or so seconds, the cough let up, and I redirected my eyes to where she was. But somehow, she was standing all the way at the far end of the grass, by the tree line, looking back at me. That's like 500 feet, I exclaimed softly. Don't follow them, Kim, Alice demanded, the usual tone in her voice. Are you kidding me? After everything that's happened today, you think I'm gonna let them walk away without giving me some answers? Don't be an idiot. We're lucky to be alive, I scoffed, already moving across the grass. What's it matter? According to you, I'll just die anyway, so fuck it, I snapped at her. That got her quiet, but she was still up front. I used a lot of my strength to jog at a steady pace across the lawn, trying not to slip on the soaked grass. Sure enough, the cloaked figure was waiting for me by the tree line. Panting, I arrived at their feet and followed them a few more steps inside the thick forest. Here, we were safe for the rainfall. Much of the noise was dampened by the abundance of trees, making the pounding of my head much more bearable. I took a second to whip my head around to throw as much water off as I could. Still freezing, I rubbed my arms and breathed heavily. Alice complained, "This is a bad idea." I ignored her and instead kept my eyes on the stranger. They stood like a statue, face obfuscated by shadows. I didn't sense it before when they first jumped me, but Alice was right. The power coming from this person was something else. I gathered my courage and stood with confidence. "Enough games." The stranger gave a very slight nod and rigidly moved their arms. In a very articulate, leisurely motion, they grabbed the cloak at the center and pulled loose a dangling string. The string was unbound, and the entire cloth became loose until it slid off their body and onto the dirt. Their entire appearance was revealed to me, and I felt Alice's soul run cold. It was another girl. She was short with exceptionally petite features, skinny and gray like Alice, but composed, unlike any other tuffle I've ever seen. Her right eye was unnaturally wide, open to the fullest, and had a very noticeable hazel iris with an outer rim of honey yellow. The other eye was closed, seemingly sealed shut, judging by the scars that surrounded it. That entire half of her head, face, and body was damaged. In the less than optimal lighting, I could see what appeared to be horrendous burns and creased flesh. That skin was darker, tight to her bones and leathery. Under the cloak, she appeared to wear a ruffled, loose-fitting lavender shirt with 3/4 sleeves and a lot of abuse in the fabric. The shirt was long enough to reach midway down her thighs, now altering my initial judgment and redetermining that it was an old nightgown instead. Nearly all of her hair on the burn side was gone, leaving only a few hanging strands around her ear. Notably, like Laomic, she had a hair color that stood out among the tuffle, a light cyan with very faint, lighter streaks. The hair itself seemed lifeless in places, shorter in the back but long at the bangs, inconsistent lengths at best. Mostly, it resembled Alice's in the way that it was sharp and risen off the skull, like a short bouquet of knives. The way she looked at me was zombified, yet scarily aware from her deadpan wide stare. Her posture was rigid, a straight back and limp arms and slightly downturned head. Alice, now keen on the stranger's appearance, went on high alert. "No, you should not be here." Alice emitted a visceral, primal fear, something I've never felt from her before, but recognized from deep within myself. I sensed her stagger, shriveled down to a modest level. The new girl was looking into my eyes, watching Alice. I couldn't look away from her penetrating gaze, unblinking and hardly breathing. "It's nice to officially meet," she said normally, almost robotic. "Alice, who is this?" Her eyes switched between mine, looking dreadful. "They call me Chrism," the girl answered. My skin crawled at the revelation of her name. I recalled some distant conversation where Alice told me about the tuffle's greatest fear. I scanned her up and down in disbelief. At this point, I began regretting my decision to follow. "Chrism, you attacked me. You helped Laomic invade my mind," I accused with irate distrust. She nodded very slightly. "Please, refrain from your anger. There are reasons for my actions." I grit my teeth. My body, mind, and soul were exhausted beyond anything I felt. "I am so sick of this shit. I want answers, not riddles," I shouted. My outburst made Alice rile. "Kim, you dumb shit! Don't agitate her. She can kill us with just a thought." Alice's breath became more unsteady, part of her wanting to stand alongside my frustration and lash out, the other far too timid at her legend status. "No," Chrism said. "She's right. The two of you deserve some clarity after so long being in the dark. It is true. It was me who aided Laomic in her venture. I gave her the relic to have a chance at your soul. Though you must understand, this was a trial meant to benefit you, not her." Gnashing my teeth, I held back my overwhelming desire to punch her. "I was tortured. Almost killed. I only managed to survive because... I stopped. She blinked once.
Because you found it, just as I had hoped you would. You were unable to conjure it up until now, so drastic measures had to be taken. Forgive me.
Alice stepped in. What the hell was that other energy?
It is Kimberly's. From the moment of her birth, her soul was linked to the ditch. A preparative establishment was meant to allow easy transfer of a tuvel as soon as she matured. However,
I interrupted. When Sin broke my father's deal, the connection remained. Chrism nodded again. How could Sin miss something like that? I questioned.
he is distracted. The task of maintaining Rowdy Tuffle, new anima, archiving his studies, and, well, nothing is perfect.
But you knew, Alice said. Chrism responded.
I have known for a very long time. Even as a young girl, I have monitored you, noted your development at every stage. Something like this has never occurred in the hundreds of deals. You are an anomaly.
My legs wobbled. Stifled breaths flexed my nostrils, and an icy agony settled just beside my heart. I started to sway.
Are you well?
Chrism asked. My hands clasped my head. All this time, I grew up hearing voices, feeling uneasy in the dark, and having a disturbing sense of people. You're telling me that it's because I've had demonic power inside me my entire life? I groaned, feeling sick.
As an infant and child, the power was inconsequential, but it grew alongside you, adapting to your biology and broadening your senses,
she explained. My dad used to tell me that I always had new imaginary friends, then just as quickly forgot about them. Who were they, really? Chrism raised her chin, noticing the slight lift in the rainstorm.
Damned souls in the ditch. Our best assumption, though we have no way of proving that definitively. Your plot in the waiting froth attracts many curious fragments.
With everything she was saying, I found myself rubbing my arms and shaking my head steadily. Alice chimed in. So, explain something to me. She held the test on her tongue. Why are you telling us any of this? What are you scheming?
You may be a valuable asset, or bitter adversary. Only time will tell, though I cherish the thought of the former.
Alice kept an intense stare, laser-focused on Chrism, taking note of every minute twitch or shuffle. What exactly do you want? You planning on letting us ferment a bit before killing and eating us? She scowled.
You treat me with such hostility,
Chrism replied. Yeah, it's been a fucking stressful day. She blinked again.
Not one day. You've been unconscious for 29 hours.
My jaw dropped. 29? What about Tansu and her mom? Didn't they notice my absence? Alice barked sarcastically. Oh, yeah, real smooth. Go ahead and tell the murderous demigod who you're most concerned about, idiot.
I am well aware of her bonds, Alice. As I said, we have been watching for a very long time. Your family has been gifted a mirage in your absence.
Sorry, I don't understand, I questioned. Chrism adjusted her bare feet in the dirt.
It is a simple spell. A version of you has been inside for this short time, constructed from memories of your interactions together. A physical form does not exist, but they convincingly perceive you.
You mean they were brainwashed to see me? Based on memories of us together? That's kind of fucked up.
It was necessary and is quite dependable in most scenarios.
Chrism then crooked her neck to the side, as if hearing her name, looking along the forest edge with a small concern in her eye.
Time is short. Sin knows nothing about what has transpired here. Unfortunately, We need more time before any definitive action can be made. I believe the time for you to be hidden is upon us."
She continued to speak, lacking urgency, compassion, or sentiment. My head weighed me down, my back throbbed, and the chill soaked into my clothes was very apparent. "I'm not going anywhere. My friends and family won't live alongside some mental copy of me for the rest of their lives. Besides, if something goes wrong, who will be there to protect them?" I passionately argued.
You will remain. I promise you that. I am referring to your collective essence. Now that my theory has been confirmed, and your true self has come to light, we cannot risk your unique vigor falling into another Tuffle's hands.
When she said we, I assumed Sin and her had some twisted plot for me. It could be anything, and that was troubling. Alice retracted her spiteful attitude, affirming that this situation was not the danger she had rightfully expected. Now, latent curiosity bubbled on her tongue. "You expect us to just do whatever you say? Not a chance. You should leave." Chrism paused, unaffected by the vague threat. In the background, the rain continued to lift slowly, leaving a haunting mist behind.
What I offer is a chance for normalcy. My wish is to conceal you until the proper time, take you off the board until we set things right.
"Hell no," Alice griped. "I don't like this. Not one bit." "Well, I don't know what to think," I admitted. We each stood in quiet contemplation. Then Chrism spoke.
I will respect your decision, whatever it may be. Please consider it. You do not understand my investment and the gravity of importance.
I gave her an annoyed but thoughtful look. "What'll happen if I agree?" She held up her fist, lax, knuckles pointed downward. Then she rotated her wrist and unfolded her fingers at the same time, revealing a small white ring in her bare palm. Immediately, I could taste the blood on it, the travesty associated.
Wear this, and it will bind you until its resources run dry. It cannot be removed, nor should it ever. No Tuffle, not even Sin, can detect you.
I gawked at it, mesmerized by its aura. My brain was spinning 1,000 miles an hour, and all these burning questions made my whole torso throb with indecision. But why?" I yelped. "All this vague bullshit and layer upon layer of mysteries. Why can't I just get a straight fucking answer out of anyone?" Her brows furrowed.
No one must learn the truth of their existence until destiny is fulfilled. An inkling, a whisper before, may pave infinite alternate paths, damning something greater than yourself. You want to kill Sin, I know. Retreat, grow together. When fate is upon you, everything will be revealed.
Alice took over my voice. "You lie. Kim, listen to me. You cannot trust a word she says. She is the deceiver, the prowler, the cannibal. I didn't just make that up right now. She earned those titles. We will end up the same as so many others if we give her any of us."
You have a strong instinct, Alice. However, it is misplaced.
There was no sincerity in her voice. She extended her hand to me, the ring resting in her palm.
I implore you to wear it.
Eyes shifting, biting the inside of my cheek. My heart was racing. It was impossible to know which choice was the right one, but if she is telling the truth, at the very least, this will give me time away from the threat of demons. The way I see it, my soul is already damned, so I might as well take any chance of peace while I can. I scooped the ring from her and held it just the same. It was warm to the touch, almost vibrating. It was so plain, raw white and smooth.
With this ring, Sin will likely assume you dead,
Chrism stated. I chuckled nervously. Don't see any downside to that. Alice scoffed at my ignorance. Fool. That means that as soon as it dissipates, you'll be back on the map, and Sin will be perplexed, angry. Right, I sighed heavily. Meaning I'll be a target. She nodded.
I suggest you practice transforming without aggressive triggers. With your newfound energy, the synchronicity between you two will be more manageable.
Alice cocked an eyebrow. We can change without her getting pissed off?
It has been done before.
She answered plainly, then twisted her wrist.
Sin will waste no time finding you once the spell wears off. You must not divulge this interaction.
What do I tell him, then? I asked, rolling the ring in my hand. A pause. She turned her head away from me, back to the woods, except this time her body followed in rotation. Her back to me, she gave one last warning.
You must cloud your reasons with action.
With that, she raised one hand with a limp wrist and flattened her palm, aimed into the forest. That motion spawned a rift a few feet in front of her. The piercing white door materialized from nothing and waited for her entry. Just as the door opened, it inhaled the thin air around us and almost knocked me off balance. She stepped through without hesitation, and the door shut tight behind her. Then it was gone, without a trace. I stood at an angle, weakness getting the better of me with contemplative depression on my face. My eyes shut, and I listened to the pitter-patter of the remaining rain. It was peaceful, despite the horrors I had been forced to endure. It felt almost calm. The ring was clenched in my fist at my side, patiently waiting for my decision, but I could not bring myself to make a choice. The thick space between Alice and me was apparent. I knew she felt embarrassed and exposed, being chained away by her sister, and now Chrism makes an appearance with a mysterious plan. I don't know who's having a bigger crisis right now. A sharp intake reset my heart rate and reminded me that I was alive. It was difficult to focus on breathing, balance, and awareness. Too many scenarios and memories bounced around my head. My eyes were bloodshot from the stress, and my very core felt ajar. It took a long time to move again. Dragging my feet across the open field toward the parking lot, I contemplated their reaction. I wondered how they would describe my behavior, seeing as a ghost held my spot in this time of absence. My body wobbled and dipped with every approaching step, but once the house came into full view, I smiled. All I want is a normal life. It's all I've ever wanted. I clasped my hand tightly around the ring. Cynicism clacked her teeth. This whole thing with Chrism rubs me the wrong way. She's a murderer of Tuffle. Whenever one of us starts to get strong, she challenges and defeats them. We've just grown a lot stronger with Lyomic, and I was expecting her to show up at some point. But it makes no sense for her to help us. So what? We should just ignore this? I groaned. We leave this place and go on the hunt. Kill any Tuffle we find and challenge Sin ourselves, on our own terms. Even if we die, you might be able to get some answers out of him. I scoffed. Killing Tuffle will only mean more of you and less of me. This is our fight. My pace slowed. She went quiet for a second, then her tone changed. It was solemn, full of regret. This is how it has to be. I will face and challenge him and reap your vengeance. Who knows, maybe if I kill him, I can stop the ditch from consuming you. She chuckled. You just don't understand. Killing Sin versus living a normal life for a little while? Well, I'd rather experience peace before hell. She grunted. The easy way. Easy for now. What I was happens to be what Chrism apparently wants. And if you are wrong about her, and she isn't going to kill us or whatever, then anything can happen. I stopped dead in my tracks. Halfway crossing the barren parking lot, I detected her impatience dwindling, and then she was gone. Crawled back to wherever it is she goes when there's nothing more to say. Alone again, my feet carried the wilted mass of my body in perturbed silence. Hoarse breaths occasionally shuddered from my lips as I closed in on the house. The hurt in my heart spiked and left me isolated on this planet. It feels like forever. The nearby street lamp flickered softly, its vibrant ray spreading like a fire across the rolling fog. My head lowered to the ground, white knuckles and a tightness in my chest. I started sobbing.